so much for being here. We're going to get started. All right, I'm going to go through the run of show and introduce you to the panelists. But first, this is the launch event for Legacy Genetics, People in Their Plants, a community-driven study on legacy cannabis genetics. It's exciting stuff, you guys. My name is Sam De La Paz. I'm going to be your MC for the evening. My title in the project is Communications and Community Engagement Advisor. I am honored to be a part of this project. Brief intro of myself. I grew up in Mendocino County, California. Lived there over 30 years of my life. Stewarded the cannabis plant, this magical plant, for over 20 years in different ways, mostly cultivating. And now through advocacy and policy work and business and community engagement, nonprofit advisement, stuff like that. I had the honor of learning from generational breeders and growers through my life in Northern California. So I'm really honored to be here. I hold an unwavering commitment to this plant, the people, and the generations of legacy that we hold in Northern California and throughout California around genetics. So yes, super honored. Seriously love all of you, thank you. And opening announcements, I'm gonna make just some logistic stuff. The bathrooms, I'm sure everybody's kind of noticed that because it says you walk in there. The bathrooms are there on that back wall in the hallway. Designating smoking area is anywhere off campus on the street. Have a heyday on the street. But snacks and beverages, hopefully you all figured that out, back in this back right-hand corner. And I think that's pretty much it. If you have any questions, we have a registration table over here. Our amazing staff members and community stewards, Hannah and Courtney, are back there at that table. And we'll help you out. And so real quickly, I'm gonna go over the evening programming. We are going to have opening remarks by Richard Mendelson, who I'll introduce here in a moment, which is a huge honor to have Richard with us today. We'll have, and that'll be from 2:30 to 2:40. We'll have a panel presentation by the research team at 2:40. That is this amazing team here. And then we will reserve the last 15 minutes for attendee Q&A at the close of the panel, and we'll have folks step up to this microphone right here, okay? Then after that, breakout discussions will take place. You'll see the tables that have the tabletop signage on them. Those are going to be reserved for breakout tables. So as we go into that session, anybody who's seated there, you might need to step up and allow whoever's hosting those tables to sit there. And then that will be beginning at 4 p.m. and the evening will conclude at 5 p.m. So that's kind of the run of show. I am honored to introduce Richard Mendelson, an internationally recognized expert on vineyard and wine law and related land use, intellectual property, business, administrative law issues, and administrative law issues. Over the past 3 decades, Richard has handled legal matters involving almost every aspect of the wine business. Richard has a special expertise in geographical indications and has been responsible for obtaining recognition for some of the most well-known American viticulture areas. He assisted the California legislature with the drafting of legislation to protect the world-famous Napa Valley geographical indication. Big deal. Subsequently, he successfully defended that law on behalf of the Napa Valley vintners in the case of Bronco versus Jolly, which he argued before the California Supreme Court. Richard founded and directed the Wine Law and Policy Program at UC Berkeley and co-founded and was president of the International Wine Law Association. Richard has served as the Appalachians Law and Policy Advisor to Origins Council since 2019 and will be advising Origins Council on their research within this project as it relates to intellectual property and public policy protections for genetic resources. Richard, we welcome you. Come on up, man.
Thank you, Sam, and good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to be here with such a diverse and passionate group as we embark on this important legacy cannabis genetics project. This is a project that's unprecedented in its scope and ambition, and I'm very excited to be one of the researchers assisting. We're setting out to identify, document, and preserve the rich genetic heritage of cannabis cultivated in California over the decades. These legacy strains are more than plants. They are living repositories of history, representing the ingenuity, the dedication, and the passion of countless cultivators who've worked tirelessly, often under the radar, as you all know, to develop and refine them. California has long been the epicenter of cannabis culture. From the early days of underground cultivation to the present, our state has been in the forefront of the cannabis innovation. Amid this rapid evolution, there lies a wealth of history, knowledge, and genetic diversity that is at risk of being lost if we don't take deliberate steps to preserve it. That's why I'm very excited about this project, because we will be safeguarding that legacy and ensuring that cannabis remains a leader in the global cannabis landscape. But along with that leadership comes responsibility. And our responsibility is twofold. First, to preserve and study the rich genetic heritage of cannabis. As we all know, the plant is incredibly diverse, with thousands of unique strains developed over the decades, often in the shadows of prohibition. These legacy genetics are not just valuable, they're irreplaceable. By documenting and preserving these strains, we're safeguarding a crucial piece of botanical and cultural history. So let's be clear, our mission is important and timely. Second, our responsibility extends to the communities that have been the stewards of this plant. These are the communities that have nurtured cannabis through its most challenging times, often facing important legal and social repercussions for doing so. Their knowledge, their stories, your knowledge and your stories and your contributions are the heart and soul of this project. Through community outreach, we aim to engage with the legacy cultivators, ensuring that their voices are heard and that they receive the recognition and support they deserve. Give yourself a hand. The work we do here will have a profound impact on the future of cannabis in California and beyond. By establishing a comprehensive body of research on these cultivars, we're laying the groundwork for the continued evolution of California cannabis as a world-renowned craft product. This is about quality, about authenticity, and the unique terroir that only California can offer. This project is deeply intertwined with the California Cannabis Appellation Project, as most of you know, and as Sam mentioned, this program is designed to protect and promote the unique qualities of cannabis produced in specified regions. And I've been fortunate during my career to be very involved from the outset of the development of appellations for wine, and have spent really many years both defining and then protecting and promoting all the things that we need to do in the cannabis industry. It's, for our program to succeed, it's crucial that farmers have the knowledge and the tools to properly document, define, and protect their genetic resources. Through our research, we aim to empower farmers with the ability to claim and leverage their genetic resources as intellectual property. This is about producer self-determination, giving cultivators who have nurtured these plants the recognition and control they deserve. It's about ensuring that they can benefit from the fruits of their labor both now and in the future. A key component of this project is the community-driven approach. We're not here to dictate what legacy cannabis and legacy genetics are. We're here to listen, to learn, and to collaborate with the very people who have lived this legacy. Together, we'll explore what a cultivar, what makes a cultivar truly legacy. And in so doing, we'll define and document these genetics in a way that honors their origin and preserves their integrity. Our research will delve into the history of cannabis cultivation in California in our legendary cultivation regions. By understanding the historical context in which these genetics were developed, we can better appreciate their significance and ensure that the history won't be lost. This is foundational work, establishing a rich body of knowledge that will inform not only our project, but also the broader cannabis community for years to come. In closing, I want to express my deepest gratitude to each of you for being here today and for your commitment to this important work. I'm confident that with the collective expertise, the passion, and the dedication in this room, we'll achieve great things. Together, we'll pave the way for a future where cannabis is not just a commodity, but a living legacy that continues to thrive for generations to come. Thank you, and let's get to work.
Well, if that's not inspiring, I don't know what is. That's incredibly exciting. Thank you so much, Richard. That's magic, man. Magic. All right. All right, we are heading right into the panel discussion. And I'm going to allow the panelists to introduce themselves or introduce each other as they go. Starting with Khalil.
Khalil Ferguson, UCA. There you go. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sam. Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, we have much sitting. Good afternoon. There we go. My name is Khalil Ferguson. I am president of the United Core Alliance. We are a nonprofit in Sacramento that does legal aid, primarily doing expungement clinics and criminal records clearance for the past 4 years. We are one of the community-based partners on the project, assisting with Genine and Ordinance Council, along with researchers, and making sure that this is community-driven, as in the name and as true to our community. So a little bit of background about the study. In 2022, the Department of Cannabis Control issued a solicitation or a call for proposals for folks to identify and preserve the history, value, and diversity of California legacy cannabis cultivars and the rich experience of its legacy cultivation community, and enable, enhance, and guide the understanding and application of cannabis genetics to the greater body of research and science-based public policy development. As a result, our team submitted a proposal, and here we are today. We were awarded $2.7 million to conduct this research. And over the course of 2.5-3 years, it will end in late 2026, we'll conclude the study and have a suite of policy recommendations, as Richard Mendelson mentioned, that will be able to support and protect the IP, intellectual property of the cultivars, and the cultivators who have worked so hard in the dark, as we all know, to really develop and make California cannabis what it is today. So I'll pass it to Genine Coleman from Ordinance Council to introduce herself. We do have a clicker, I forgot.
Thank you, Khalil. Thank you all for coming. I really, really appreciate seeing all of your faces. And for those of you that I don't know, please find me. I'd love to meet you and chat about your relationship to cannabis. So I'm going to introduce my organization a little bit later on in the presentation. But again, my name is Genine Coleman, Executive Director of Ordinance Council. And I wanted to start by talking about the overarching research questions and the objectives of the research. And so, again, as Khalil mentioned, this research priority was put forward by the Department of Cannabis Control, and the research questions are twofold. What are California's cannabis legacy genetics? And of course, in order to understand what California's cannabis legacy genetics are, we need to understand what California cannabis and legacy producing communities, who they are and where they are. So those are our overarching research questions, and we've got a number of objectives that we've tied into our research project. So first and foremost, to establish community-driven plant cultivar definitions and documentation. And this is critical in order for breeders and cultivators to be able to protect and leverage their genetic resources as intellectual property in the commercial space. So we're going to be doing that through herbaria science, and Eleanor is going to speak to that. And ensuring that cultivation communities are acknowledged for their breeding work and can leverage these resources as for their own agricultural futures. So the next objective is to understand the connection between the social and genetic history of cannabis plants in the legacy cultivation regions. And we're very excited that this is a statewide study, so we're looking both at the urban areas and the rural areas, so this is very comprehensive, and I think that's really critical for the history of cannabis under criminalization. And thirdly, the objective to develop, evaluate, and refine a methodology that serves as a model for working with legally marginalized and often underserved communities to document, preserve historic cannabis cultivars in California and beyond. And this is a really, really critical component and part of why we chose to adopt a community-based participatory research model. And so it's my pleasure to go ahead and pass it on to Marj Plum.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. My name is Marj Plum. Hi, baby. How are you? I have over 45 years experience working with communities, community-based organizations, and academics, in particular around how to do research together. I actually am not part of your community. I actually don't know a whole lot about the actual research topic, but the good news is that's good, because my job is to make sure that there is community academic partnership throughout the entire research. So I don't come to this project with preconceived notions about how it should work. This project, as Genine had said, is based on what's called CBPR, Community-Based Participatory Research, and I'm going to explain what CBPR is. So first is like, why do we need CBPR? And one of the reasons is because traditional research, while good at answering many questions, it can sometimes not be good at answering certain questions. So traditional research is really focused on what's called researcher neutrality. So a researcher actually would be considered unduly influenced if the researcher was engaging with the people they were researching, right? So community-based participatory research is a way of doing research that actually throws that model out and says you really need to be working together in order to be able to conduct your research. There's many reasons for that. One is research on people can sometimes keep you from really seeing what the impact of your research is. There are sometimes, ethical breaches that have happened because of that. And it also can be, you can have misinterpretations. I always like to use this photo as an example of a project that I was called into in Nigeria. A California-based researcher was trying to figure out why there was such a high maternal mortality rate in Nigerian villages. And so the researcher created a survey, contacted a medical school in Nigeria and said, can you hire some people to go to these 3 villages and have them interview the village, the folks living in the village, so we can get some data on what's going on. One of the questions was, do you own a car? What's your thought about how many people said that they own a car, right? Actually, 75% said they owned a car. And so the California researcher brought me in and said, go to Nigeria, figure out either why they're not using their car to get to a hospital or why they lie, was my instruction. So go to Nigeria, have conversations with the folks down there. Each village has a car. So the folks who were doing the surveys were shocked that 25% of people in the village didn't know that the village owned a car. They actually thought that that was the problem with the question, right? So it's really important to engage with the community on the research that you're doing, or you run the risk of misinterpretation or of having an answer to a question that does not make sense. The reason that there's a high mortality, maternal mortality rate in Nigerian villages is because that one car is owned by the village, and you don't always use the car to take a woman to a hospital. So that was more important to understand than whether each villager owned a car. So community-based participatory research is a balance of equal partnership between the academic and the community partners in the research study. And it's through the entire research study. So coming up with a question, developing the research plan, carrying out the research, understanding and interpreting the results, and disseminating the results. This particular project is fitting a particular model of community-based participatory research. There is a research team that includes personnel, project workers, students, interns, other volunteers. They're all participating on different aspects of the research. There are co-PIs, and you saw those listed. You know, community and academic PIs are part of this project, and they provide the leadership and have the responsibility for the project. There will be a community advisory board and also other ways for the community to participate, including on key input and specific decisions that are being made. And then there are the stakeholders, and they'll also be included. So community-based organizations, funders, businesses, universities. So this is a very complicated way of doing research. It's a lot easier as an individual research to just create a survey and go get people to answer it. It will get messy at times. It will get hard at times, but the entire team is committed to this approach, to this research question. And then to end, just, you know, why do we do this? Why do we go through, you know, what is sometimes more complicated or stressful? It benefits the community. You get to answer important questions. You'll get to develop research and evaluation skills, which you can use in other ways. It provides funding, as we've already heard, builds management capacity, and provides data for advocacy and change. I did research on community-based participatory research teams that had already completed their research, and they had a very high percentage of having impact on policy. When the community is involved in doing the research, they understand the research, they're not just reading some research report, you will be able to go off and do, you know, talk about what the results are. And it benefits the researcher as well. So I will be around and working with the team to make sure that we stay as collaborative as possible. And Genine is next. Thank you.
Thank you, Marj. It's an honor to be working with you all. I appreciate it. So I wanted to offer a little bit more of an introduction, pardon me, to myself and my organization. The Origins Council is an organization that we founded in 2019. It's a federally tax-exempt 501c4 nonprofit research, education, and advocacy organization. So we've got two program tracks. One is our government affairs program, and we advocate collectively with the community in state and federal matters. And then we have a research, education, and development program. So our work on this grant is housed within that program. And our overarching mission is dedicated to sustainable rural economic development and establishing nationally and internationally recognized, legally defensible, standards-based geographic indication systems for cannabis. So it is my honor to be working on this project, and I wanted to offer that I've been a student of CBPR since right around 2015 when I started to learn about it from my mentor, Sarah O'Donnell, who can't be here today. She's a dear friend, and she's our founding board chair. And she did 10 years of CBPR research in the public health space as the founder of the Mendocino Cancer Resource Centers. And so, you know, in dialoguing with her and learning about CBPR, it really seemed like a very powerful way to work with the legacy producing community and the cannabis community historically, broadly as a legally marginalized community. Because really empowering our voices in any way that we can is essential to really being heard, to being acknowledged, to normalizing cannabis, and to advocating for communities. And so we're really excited to be participating in this project to learn in an applied way around CBPR and really see what we can do to support the farming community, the historic cultivators of California cannabis, to really identify, acknowledge your work, protect it, and give you the tools to really advance yourselves with your own commercial interests, whether collectively under things like appellations or individually. So I just wanted to offer those words. I'm happy to pass it to Khalil to talk more about United Coralines.
As I introduced earlier, my name is Khalil Ferguson, president of United Coralines, and we're a legal aid nonprofit in Sacramento, California, but we have branches or connections throughout the Bay Area and Southern California, particularly San Diego. One thing I didn't mention, this is home to me, the Bay Area specifically. UCA really reflects the urban community or the urban connection to the community, and as I will reinforce in our meetings and with Genine, one reason why we work closely so collaboratively in legislature as well as research is to emphasize the historic connection between the urban community and the rural community, or the cultivators, wherever you may be, whether you're in the Emerald Triangle, or as I learned through another Berkeley-led study, there's a connection to inland Modesto and Stockton, for some folks who are bringing weed up from SoCal, and that was a distro point. So wherever that may be, just recognizing the connection between our two communities and reinforcing that through the study. So the UCA will be organizing, along with our community partners in Los Angeles, San Diego, and my home city, Richmond, and the Bay Area, our community studies along with Sacramento, to make sure that the urban communities reflected and the policy, the genetics from those communities, or any history we can learn from them, is reflected in the study as well. So I think we can move on to the next slide, which reflects a greater detail or greater dive into the elements of the study.
So really central to the study is the culturally sensitive community outreach, education, and engagement plan. And I really want to acknowledge that this was actually a funder mandate from the Department of Cannabis Control. And I want to thank Christina Dempsey and make you blush a little bit. Christina was formerly with the Department of Cannabis Control, and really appreciate your leadership and work on developing this priority topic. Thank you for coming. And so as Marj spoke to, with community-based participatory research, it's a partnership approach. And so it's absolutely essential that we engage the community as much as possible, right? And so there's a number of ways that we're planning to do that. First and foremost, we've been doing foundational work internally to prepare to engage the community and the public more broadly. And so we did a series of project personnel training. Marj led a training in community-based participatory research for the project personnel. Khalil led in a diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice training for the community personnel. And Hannah Nelson, please raise your hand, Hannah. Hannah's in the back, and Hannah's an incredible human being and a friend, and a longtime cannabis attorney. And she conducted a training for the team on engaging war on drug impacted communities. And Hannah's going to be leading one of our breakout discussions later, so we'll have an opportunity to hear from Hannah and engage with her personally. This other piece coming up, item B, establishing a community advisory board. This is absolutely core to the project. And so we're establishing a community advisory board that's composed of members from the legacy cultivation communities with expertise relevant to legacy genetics. You all are the experts. We are facilitating this project on your behalf with your expertise. And so the methodology that we're using to establish the Community Advisory Board is working with our partner organizations that Khalil mentioned. And so Origins Council has a number of regional partner organizations, as does UCA, and we're coming together with project personnel to conduct some focus group meetings to discuss what the criteria should be. So it's important that we're including members from the legacy cultivation community statewide, and making sure that we're hitting all the right marks so that our Community Advisory Board is really, really well represented and has the expertise that we need to really advise our team for the duration of the project. Next is our project website, and this is going to be our clearinghouse for all information related to the project, up-to-date information about the project, access to educational materials, research data, and all project deliverables. So transparency is a really important part of community engagement, and so we're really putting a lot of energy and investment into the project website to make sure that information is available in real time to the community and the public at large. Coming up in weeks and coming months, we'll be hosting and recording public webinars, and so we're trying to reach as many folks as possible. In-person meetings are very important and critical, but so are virtual meetings, so that we can reach particularly folks that live remotely, right? And so those webinars are going to enable the research team to dialogue with community members about research objectives, and we'll do deep dives on each of the sub-research components in those webinars and provide educational programming as well. And those webinars will be recorded and put up on our website so that there's public access to them after the fact. And then last but not least, by any stretch of the imagination, we're going to be hosting in-person 2-day community workshops in the communities that we're studying. And this is going to support educational and experiential learning and enable collaborative data collection. And so those community meetings will be coming up in 2025 and 2026. Everything will be noticed on our website and our social media. And so we're really inviting engagement, and you can reach us at any time at info@legacygenetics.org is our website. And then last, program evaluation. And this is again critical for CBPR, community-based participatory research, because we want to create a feedback loop of information as we're engaging the community and each other as a research team, really evaluating how the program is going. So in order to support that, we're going to perform program evaluation throughout the research, and the resulting qualitative and quantitative data and their interpretation will inform the ongoing CBPR research design. And so this is a really core part of the project, and again, we're going to have breakout discussions after the panel, and so this is one of the topics that we invite you all to come and speak to us and have more in-depth dialogue about this. And with that, I'm happy to pass it to Dr. Dominic Corva. Dominic?
Thank you, Genine. Is it okay if I go here? Thank you, Marj and Khalil, and welcome everyone. I have this in front of me as well as behind me, and I'll try to make sure I'm talking about the slide that's in front of me. So my particular subscope on the project, my research scope addresses two elements of the research priority from the Department of Cannabis Control, for which we awarded the grant. One, I share with everyone else the narrative history and stories of individuals associated with the creation and preservation of cannabis genetics in California. And two, the proposal should review how the prohibition and criminalization of cannabis cultivation impacted the overall findings of the research, including but not limited to the diversity of cultivars and breeders. So my distinct scope deliverables are the publication of 2 academic journal articles. And then I'm going to kind of backtrack into what are the specific research questions. One thing to understand is if we're doing research on legacy genetics, we're doing something that is, thanks Marj, that has actually a global context. That if we are doing research on the legacy of California communities, we have to acknowledge that actually the legacy of plant stewardship is global and deeply historical. And in this way, this will support the research being done, opening up possibilities for other places to do similar research as well. And so my scope is both sort of global in the sense that the history of cannabis breeding and genetics in California has a very global context in terms of where the genetics came from, where they went to, how they recombined, how they came back. So in some ways, there's an element of the study of a diaspora, especially of significant people from California communities that may have gone elsewhere, for example, Amsterdam in the 1980s, but around the world, right? And outside of California. So the specific research questions I'm addressing: when and where in California were communities formed around the stewardship of cannabis genetics, which means both breeding and cultivation? When and where in the world did California plant stewards connect with other places in terms of genetics development and plant stewardship? And then, very importantly, the law enforcement context, the context of this is the age of prohibition that we're especially addressing when we're talking about the emergence of California, broadly speaking, as a legacy cannabis site. Thank you. Who I am professionally is actually not a slide up here anymore, and it kind of works backward from that. I wanted you to get a clear picture of what I'm doing. But I'm an assistant professor of sociology at Cal Poly Humboldt, and I'm the program lead for the Cannabis Studies program that I co-proposed and currently lead at Cal Poly Humboldt. But what qualifies me to do this is not that. It's not just the credentials. You're an academic at an institution. It's my experiences that have been partially enabled by my professional credentials. But two general things. 15 years of field experience, which includes research, activism, and organizing in and with and as part of cannabis communities, especially in California, Oregon, and Washington. But I've been blessed to also spend some time nationally and around the world amongst folks who are broadly interested in the question of plant stewardship and have been fighting to end the war on cannabis in the context of global prohibition. And then, in particular within California, 4 years of being a lead researcher and writer for cannabis equity assessments across California, in which asking about the social context of community formation and the impacts of law enforcement were absolutely central. And my work did include, on the last one especially, I got to hang out with this guy, helping out with the San Diego County Equity Assessment, Khalil Ferguson, and I'm just super excited to be working with him again. And we have those ties that actually, like, it's part of the strength of what we're doing is that we don't all come to this as strangers, actually. We were all doing this already in some fashion. And for me, you know, the conversations I've been having just as a matter of interest and fun with so many plant stewards over the last 15 years. I'm delighted to systematize it and get this stuff on record. And of course, I want to honor that there has been work in the past that we owe, you know, our starting point to. I want to shout out Clark and Merlin's Cannabis Ethnobotany, Evolution Ethnobotany. That said, you know, where am I going to find information to answer these questions? So we've been doing archival research with student assistants, which is combing not just the library databases, but also the increasingly proliferating landscape of podcasts and interviews and stories that are about this subject for the last year, which is up to and including contemporary podcasts like Christopher Carr's Cannabis Connection show. If you're not familiar with that, I encourage you to check it out. Christopher Carr is a delightful interviewer and gets a lot of first-person interviews. And it's important for us to be already aware of how people are already talking about them and to connect with the work that has already been done. So from archival research, there are particular people and names that emerge that are significant. And the second is ethnographic interviews of people with lived experience relevant to the research questions, as well as researchers, global researchers like Pierre Chuvy out in France, for example. Those ethnographic interviews, and that would be the next one, right? What and who. They're semi-structured interviews with people that are identified in three ways: from the archival research, from the network of people that I've developed over 15 years and the conversations we've had, and from a set of people, I see a grammar error here, recruited by the community advisory boards guiding the rest of the project. So we're triangulating in order to really give the project a global sense of place, right? And to take up what largely, was forbidden starting in the 1970s around research, which is to really explore the human cannabis relationship as something that is deeply historical and shaped, especially in recent times, by the twin processes of both globalization and global prohibition, from which we are beginning to emerge. We have not emerged from it. We are beginning to emerge from it. So it's going to be about 100 interviews, and how many of each type is going to depend on how we go, but we call it the snowball method, right? As you start with key informants that are around you in your backyard, and you help shape and refine your questions, and you develop other leads and other key people to talk to. And so that is the method I'm using here. There will be initial interviewees, and I'm going to be talking to all the folks identified along the way over the next 2 years. So with that said, I would like to pass the mic to my colleague Todd Holmes from UC Berkeley Oral History Center.
All right, hey, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming. My name is Todd Holmes. I'm a historian here, well, actually not here, over there at UC Berkeley. And I'm the historian of the team, which I'm sure all of you now, it's like, if you're gonna have a team, you need a historian on it, right? At least that's what we like to tell ourselves. But anyway, for this project, I'm gonna be conducting about close to 100 hours of oral histories that, along with other elements, will be my main role in this project, which will be archived over at Berkeley. But before I get into that, because that's why I want to use this talk to actually talk just a little bit about the oral history method and how that's going to work in this project. But before I do that, I wanted to introduce, I guess, who I am and who I actually work for. So I'm with the Oral History Center at UC Berkeley. So that means we are a special independent research unit of the Bancroft Library. It's not a regular library like you would think, right? So we don't really have books on shelves. It is actually one of the oldest rare book and manuscript archives in California and the West. And so our office was founded in 1953, which I guess in oral history land makes us the second oldest oral history center in the US. And we actually maintain one of the nation's largest and most accessible oral history collections here over at Berkeley. So it's probably over about 5,000 volumes of what we say, and each volume ranges from anything to 2-hour interview to over 50-hour interviews. So it's actually in the academic world, it's a rare place for a historian to work. So we are research faculty, meaning I don't teach. I don't grade papers. I actually have very, very little contact with students. There's about 5 of us, plus our director and production staff, so all we do is run oral history projects. We do this nationwide, so we have projects that are across the nation, but a lot of what I do is here in our backyard in California. So I think collectively we do about 500 hours of recorded interviews each year, so we're busy. And that's outside of documentaries, exhibits, and other kind of nerdy history stuff that we do. To let you know a little bit about myself, I'm a lifelong Californian. In fact, the only time I haven't lived in this state is actually the 6 years I had to spend on the East Coast for graduate school. And then I was lucky enough to actually come back to my home state, and I was a historian at Stanford University for a number of years before I came here to Berkeley in 2016. I specialize in California and the West, so all things California is what I do. And specifically, I've spent almost nearly 2 decades studying California politics. And the way the evolution you go from California politics to California cannabis is this. You study politics for long enough, you realize to understand California politics, you have to understand California business. And to understand California business, that means you're going to have to study agribusiness, meaning California agriculture. And it's only a matter of time when you're in studying agribusiness that you start studying California cannabis. So that's the evolution of how I got into this topic a number of years ago, and I'm really honored to be part of this research team. So what is this thing we call oral history? Oral history is actually the collection of people's memories, experiences, and observations that have historical significance through recorded interviews, right? So historians started, and I promise you this is not a history lecture, right? I'm promising you right now. I'm just letting you know how this came about, right? So us historians started doing this probably around in the 1960s. And it's because we began to notice that history nerds like myself, when I write a book, it's all through spending astronomical amounts of time in archives going through documents. Well, who leaves documents? Well, businesses leave documents, politicians leave documents, we got government records, right? And as you started looking at this, you mean out of large society, this little thin layer at the very top are the documents that are left and deemed, archival by universities. And that means most of the history that was written over centuries was this top-down approach that left out about 95% of the rest of society, especially marginalized groups. We're talking about women, we're talking about working class communities, we're talking about especially communities of color, and we're also talking about California's cannabis community. So oral history was the way that we could actually backtrack and try to document the histories of these communities, of these people, right? And thus make it actually a much more accurate, as I like to say, and much more inclusive historical record. Now, a lot of people say, so you just go around like interviewing people, so you show up, you hit record, and you ask them questions. Well, simply, yes, maybe. But actually, the oral history process is much more in-depth than that. And so more people are aware of journalist interviews, right? Maybe come in, maybe 30 minutes, right? They hit record and they leave. In an oral history, the person I'm interviewing, we have a lot of contact before I ever show up and hit record. Right? This is a very in-depth planning process. That means there's a lot of discussions that are going on, and that's one of the things I want to talk about in my next couple of slides, is that kind of process. It's collaborative. That means it's not me just asking questions. This is a partnership, meaning the interviewee has just an equal role in that, just like in our project, right? How that kind of collaboration with the community. We're going to be doing that with the interviewees, meaning they have a role of what's going to be discussed. They also have a say in what's not discussed. Right? And so there's no gotcha questions, there's no surprising, there's no curveballs. So this is a partnership and a collaboration. And again, for this project, oh, it is on there. Okay, so for this project, we're going to be conducting about 90 to 100 hours of those oral histories, which will not just be recorded and preserved, but they're going to be transcribed. So those transcripts are also going to be available to the public. So how are we selecting who we're going to conduct oral histories with? Well, I'm pleased to announce that it's not Todd's decision, right? Which is usually a risky proposition no matter what's on the table, right? Again, as Genine said, we're going to go to the communities. You're the experts. And this is not just true for our CBPR methodology that's guiding this project. That's actually true to the oral history process. Every single project that I've ever undertaken, it's not me choosing who I interview. I collaborate in various different kind of processes with communities, organizations, government agencies to find out who other people think should be the people I should be sitting down and interviewing, right? Again, they are the experts, and that's one of the beautiful things about oral history. In universities, there's a lot of people who like to throw the word expertise around. Oral histories remind me constantly of everything I don't know, and that's the reason I love doing them. So for this project, one of the ways we're going to do that is we're finalizing a nomination form. And we're going to have those nomination forms on our website. And then we're going to have outreach to the communities. That means, again, we're coming out to the communities, to the experts themselves of, hey, who should we interview? So you can nominate yourself, nominate other people in the community. And we're going to take those, hopefully, large list of nominations, and then we're going to the research team, we're going to be coordinating with our advisory board. And we're going to go through those nominations and we're going to prioritize, right, and collate those. So that's how the interview list is going to take shape. And again, what I want to emphasize here is the interviewee's voice, just like we're reaching out to the community to help document, who we should talk to in their communities and let them have a role. Well, again, the interviewee's voice has a hand and a role in every part of that process. Again, not just for what's going to be discussed, but also what's made public. So again, what I call the pre-interview process. So I'm going to sit down with interviewees, and we're going to go through a long series of conversations. They're going to help me figure out, you should look more into this. This is what we need to discuss. And this is what I'm not comfortable discussing at all. And out of those long discussions and those kind of meetings and my own research, we're going to then start together, collaboratively, start making outlines for each session, right? And those outlines, I go and kind of carve them out, think of them as roadmaps, and I share that with the interviewee. And they get to go through that, and they can edit that however they want. They can take things off, they can add more things. So again, it's a collaborative process from start to finish. And once we get to the interview and I show with my camera and I want to press record, if it's not on that outline, it's not discussed. I mean, it's that simple. I mean, the main key is not just trust, but I want the interviewees, when they sit down with me, to be able to know that they know where we're going in this session. There's no curveballs, there's no gotcha questions or surprises. So that they're comfortable, they're confident, and more importantly, you have fun. Because if you're not having fun, then I like to ask, what the hell are you doing? Right, and particularly in this. So we're documenting history, and which is like the best job in the world, according to me. And so, even outside of location, I always let the interviewees tell me, like, what location you most comfortable with. And so that, again, it's a collaborative decision from start to finish. Each interview will be professionally transcribed. And that transcription, again, has a double kind of review. Yes, I go through it and I correct, little editing errors and transcription errors, but then it's up to the interviewee themselves to go through it. They can edit their own transcript, their own words, any way they wish, right? And they get to decide what goes public and what does not. And again, I can talk a little more in the Q&A or our breakout session more about our processes of redactions and seals, but those are other options, again, for the interviewee. So again, you have complete control of what goes forward and what goes public. And only the approved transcript is made public. We're going to archive these in the Bancroft Library. This will be the California Cannabis Oral History Project and Archive. Hard copies will be located there, but each transcript will also be digitized. And so that will be available online through our online archive and made completely public for free to researchers and the general public. The video recordings will not be made initially public. Those will be processed and stored at the Bancroft, and they can be publicly available only upon request. And again, that's up to the interviewee to decide what they want public and what they don't. And so even when it comes to legal releases, you also have your options, right? So every interviewee still owns their words. No one takes that away from you. Every interviewee owns their image rights. Nobody takes that away from you either. Right, and so you have about 3 different options of the legal release that you can choose from. And again, it's completely in the interviewee's hands. And generally contribution, right, again, this type of collection of oral histories will be the first of its kind. This is the first time, really, that we can place California cannabis in the historical record. And more importantly, it's going to be a history that's actually told by the community themselves in their own words. And I think there's no proper way to actually do that than let the community have that type of control. And when connected with other aspects of this research, again, this kind of collaborative study is really groundbreaking. It's never been done before, and I really think that the contributions, you know, are really going to be beneficial both to the community and to the general public. The last thing I'll say is I'm an outsider to this community. You know, a lot of us grow up around cannabis, right? We hear all the schoolyard lore. Nobody outside these communities really understands this history. And I'll tell you, the people in Sacramento know even less. So documenting this type of research is really aimed at empowering the communities to empower themselves in both policy and also maybe things like appellation. So anyways, I'm out of time, and that's all I got. Thank you all. I will now pass it to the team scientist, Eleanor.
From history to science. I think we'll all stay awake for this science though. My name is Eleanor Kuntz. I am exceptionally excited to be here, and I'm really excited to see a lot of people in the audience who we've worked with in the past, so we can really dive into what we're doing in this project. So our focus is really stewarding the genetic and the documentation portion of this project. And I hope that everyone has seen the vouchers in the back. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Specifically, we are working to document legacy California cannabis plant diversity. It's critical to understand the history of the plants. Herbarium collections are fundamental ways of doing that. We'll get into this a little bit more in a minute. A major push of this work is to really codify names. So establishing cultivar, strain, varietal names is critical to being able to communicate not only within the community, but outside the community, the value of those plants. And also just to understand cannabis genetic diversity as a whole, how it's distributed within and among communities. Do we have different kinds of genetic diversity in different locations? Do we see different amounts of genetic diversity in the open market and the legacy market? So do we see differences here, and how can we understand this to help preserve our legacy genetics as plants and our legacy cultivators and stewards of these plants? So my background, I'm an evolutionary geneticist with a focus on medicinal plants generally. So my organization, LeafWorks, studies plants across the natural products world. We focus heavily on medicinal plants, and cannabis is one of the plants that we work with, and it's the most interesting of the group. She's kind of the rock star of the medicinal plants, and that's one of the things that I've always really appreciated about cannabis, is how cannabis can be a voice for a lot of the other plants that we don't really talk about very much. And I think this is a way to change that. So in understanding plant biodiversity, and when you move plant biodiversity into agriculture, understanding how plants have changed and how those plants interact with the world around them is critical. And so we have some really classic examples in evolutionary genetics of how you have this little lowly brassica that has been transformed into so many of the agricultural crops that you see in your grocery store. Cabbage, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, kohlrabi, cauliflower, it's all the same species, right? And so I think that's what's really important, is that understanding how a single species can be differentiated into many different types, cultivars, is critical to having any kind of differentiated agricultural system. So cannabis is just like brassica. It's exceptionally diverse, and one group can make an immense amount of different types. This room, I am preaching to that choir, right? Some of them are tall, some of them fall over, some of them have really great smells, some of them don't really smell very much, but have amazing chemical processes for certain pathologies. Like, these plants are exceptional powerhouses, not only at chemistry, making an immense amount of chemicals, but also in their ability to do many different types of other things, so outside of the box. One of the other plants that has this illustrious ability is corn. Love or hate corn, there are very few plants that you can put on your kitchen, you can eat, and then you can also make an industrial oil out of, or building materials. And cannabis also has this possibility as well. And so it's a very interesting plant in that way. Plant vouchers. So we know we have all of this diversity within cannabis, And so how do we start to understand that diversity in a way that is digestible and communicable to other individuals? So within plants and within botany, we have very classic tools to do this. So herbariums are the houses to plant vouchers, and plant vouchers are these flat pressings of plants. So if you go out into the wild and you find a new species of plant, the first thing you do is make an herbarium pressing of it. That herbarium pressing is then linked to a botanical description, and that is a type specimen that then is referenced anytime that species is acknowledged in a research project or in an agricultural system. And the same is true when you dive down into more fine-scale nuances of type. So when you get into cultivars. So when you have new cultivars of any plant, you're going to do the same kind of documentation where you're going to understand what in and of itself of that plant makes it unique and special. And so within cannabis, we have had so much proliferation of diversity within so many different communities that anyone in this room may know their plants really, really well. And you go 50, 100 miles down the road and you go visit another farm, and those plants can look very different from the plants that you know very well. And so understanding this diversity is critical for so many of the things that we need to do. This is just a picture of an herbarium. They're actually exceptionally interesting places to visit. When we do any kind of identification work on plants, you generally go to an herbarium and get type specimens, pull them out. This is actually the Smithsonian's herbarium, and so it's a very unique place, and many of these resources are experiencing a renaissance through digitization right now. So when we first started trying to figure out how can we help understand biodiversity, we realized this resource that is so fundamental to botany and herbarium doesn't exist in cannabis in and of itself. We have onesie, twosies of herbarium pressings in herbaria, but there's no collection that can really get out what is the diversity that is held within this plant and how is this diversity partitioned across the landscape or within communities. And so we started the Herbarium Candor as a nonprofit to help farmers document their diversity. So this is really getting at understanding the history of the plant, because all of those pressings are connected to a farm and a farmer. And so you know where the history of that plant is, and it's attached in this very immutable form. And you can add to that herbarium specimen any information that you want. So there's this beauty in an herbarium that the amount of information that you can utilize it for grows with the accessions that are in it. So if you have one farmer that has many different things that are related, they can understand that and document it through the herbarium use. If you have the same plant grown on different farms, you can start to understand that genetic by environment connection that is so critical for building things like appellations, where you say, okay, we know we have the same plant in all of these different environments, and they produce very different outputs when they're put in those different environments. This is just a tool to help understand that interaction. Pretty picture, plant presses. These are pretty low, it's not high tech, right? This is pretty low tech. It's very accessible, it's very inexpensive, and it has profound power and longevity. So I had the pleasure of going to the Natural History Museum in Stockholm with my family the last time I was there, and you can see the first type specimen from Linnaeus of Cannabis sativa in that museum. It's super neat. Several hundred years old. These things last forever. It's an amazing resource. So this is where things get sticky and tricky. And this is why the community is here. Because one of the things that we need to do in order to have a differentiated agricultural system are have things that have names that mean something. So if I go and I ask my person to go to the store and buy me Gala apples, and they bring me Granny Smith apples, I'm going to be annoyed because they're not the same apple and they have a very different taste profile. You know, the same thing is true with dogs. You know, if you want a shepherd, they don't have to be clones, so apples are clones, so it's the same thing, it's the same thing. But you have types, you have an idea of what this name means. And it's the community's work to do this. This is not the work of an outside genetics group that goes and surveys genetic diversity and comes back and tells you what your plants are. That's not how it works. It's never been how it works in agriculture, and it's absolutely not the correct way of doing things. It really is a ground-up approach with people who have been working with these plants and breeding these plants and trading them, and then genetics can help inform how those things have happened. But it's really about codifying names and phenotypes around what is Bubba Kush, what is Tangy, is it a clone, is it a seed varietal, is there variation? And these are the kinds of questions that are going to be critical to have immense amount of community input to understand how to get to a codified naming system, so that when I say, I want you to go down the street and get X, that I am getting what I expect in return. So how do you do this? Well, it's kind of like eating an elephant. It's like a huge amount of work, and you just start somewhere. We've done this in all of our plants. Roses, tulips, there's so many plants that have an immense amount of diversity, and you just start making definitions where you are, and you start looking at what are those plants that are the most valuable within your communities themselves, such that those plants are defined. I really am kind of a nitpicker about the term cultivar. It's the correct term for botany. Varietal is a legal term, it is not a botanical term. And so I feel like the cultivar definition is a really important thing to move towards. We have an international code of nomenclature that is devoted to cultivated plants. The ICNCP, this is an international organization, and it governs naming for most of our agricultural types. So if you think of apples or roses or any of our horticultural varieties, it's a registrar for those names so that you can have some order. They have started to do some things in hemp, but let's push them to get with the entire species. So why do cultivar names matter? Communication would be the first really big issue. It's very hard to communicate value if you're not talking about the same thing. Agriculture and differentiated agricultural products. So my background is in rice. One bag of rice is just like the next bag of rice. If it's long grain and a certain quality, it goes in the bag and it's worth a certain amount of money. This is absolutely not how we want cannabis to be, right? The name matters, the chemistry matters, what's in that bag matters. So we need to have names that go along with that so we can actually have a differentiated agricultural system. Also, this is a medicinal plant, and I think that's really important to remember. In addition to just being wildly awesome, these plants are medicinal and have medicinal value, and certain plants are going to really be able to push certain pathologies forward and have a profound effect on populations that need plant medicine. And so really holding your plants constant in any kind of situation where you're evaluating how well those plants do in a medical situation is exceptionally important, so that you can understand what amount of variation in your human population is affecting positive or negative prognosis versus variation within the plant, right? So names, again, become very, very important in understanding how to move these topics forward in a way where we can have direct communication about them. And then also IP considerations. You really need to know what you're dealing with so that you can protect it. So if you are a breeder and you have a certain plant and you are going to expand your operations and you need to be able to keep in check your partners, you have to have language around that so that you can do that. And again, this is just the same. The goals of the work are to really dive into this, realizing that these are community-based definitions, and the community really should come together and have some probably very heated debates sometimes about who's who and what's what. And that's the work we're really trying to dig into. And I'm going to pass it off to, I think, Genine for the last roundup of where that goes.
So I'm happy to close up the panel discussion here and touch on the public policy and intellectual property protections component of our research and education. So we're going to be examining existing and future intellectual property and public policy instruments that support cultivators and breeders in stewarding genetic diversity, protecting your novel genetics, and commercially leveraging your collective or individual genetic resources. And as our speakers have explained, the first part is really establishing what we have, documenting it, and then understanding in full what your options are currently under federal prohibition, and moving forward as prohibition continues to repeal on the federal level, we'll have more tools available to us. And so part of the work here is to really map out what the opportunities are for the cultivating and breeding community to protect novel genetics if they have them, to clarify what are novel genetics, and what are your opportunities to leverage those genetics commercially. So licensing agreements are one consideration, appellations are another. And again, as we start to move to potentially Schedule 3 for cannabis, or ideally descheduling entirely, and the regarding of cannabis cultivation as agriculture and access to all of those tools both nationally and internationally, that's really important for us to map and provide the policymakers with a map as well as the community. Again, we're going to be driving a lot of educational content, and so that'll come through in the form of webinars and also a report that we're developing around the IP and policy pieces, and putting all of that information up as it's developed on our website so it's publicly available. And our goal here is really to empower the community with information and tools as much as possible. And then we're going to analyze the impacts of the existing and potential policy frameworks on the overall genetic diversity and market opportunities for commercial cannabis cultivation and breeding. And lastly, inform a suite of public policy recommendations, again, that roadmap for the policymakers. So I'm happy to pass it to Sam to move into Q&A, and also I'm gonna go ahead and back up to a previous slide that really lays out our research and personnel team, and so you'll have a better sense of who we're all working with here.
Genine, and while you do that, I wanted to underscore something that we discussed earlier this week, or I think it was last week, time flies, regarding something, bringing it back home and connecting to its relevancy to all of our communities, and that, yes, the IP aspect of it, the public policy aspect provides protection, but really wanting to provide another way of protective class. I think in context of current political, or the political landscape right now between cannabis and hemp, equity and the definition of equity, making sure that we have a carve out to protect our economy as craft growers, as folks who have been in the industry for decades, as the political landscape changes based on whatever the influences are, whether it comes from federal lobbying or state lobbying, but making sure that this community is protected through the intellectual property process, and there is a remedy at law, or a remedy of such in the case that there are encroachments from the hemp industry or wherever it may come from onto craft cannabis and the legacy community as well.
Thank you for that, Khalil. Amazing, and spot on. So I just wanted to quickly go over a reminder of the rest of the program. So we're gonna take some Q&A now. We're about 15 minutes over time, so we're going to move our break back to 4 p.m. And right now, we're gonna move straight into Q&A. And then after break, just a reminder that there's gonna be panel discussions, breakout discussions at the breakout tables that you see the signs on. And I'll give a reminder of that about 5 minutes before those start. So right now, if anyone has questions, we're starting with one question each, and would like everybody that has a question to approach the standing mic here. And we're happy to answer, the panelists are happy to answer any questions that you may have. So please ask away. Anybody? All right, let's go. Don't all run at once.
Yeah, I was just wondering, given the amount of mutation and diversity there is for these seeds of cannabis, it seems out of the apple because.
Oh, sorry, turn the mic. I'm sorry. If you can turn the mic on there. I apologize.
Check.
Yes.
Yep. Okay, yeah. Yeah, given the amount of diversity that is in cannabis breeding, the amount of mutations that happen from one generation to the next, I like the apple analogy. So using the terminology, is there a consensus on kind of putting all seed varietals as a cultivar, and then anything that has a name that has strict, this is what it is, this is the terpene profile, chemotypic profile. There is variety based on the same clones grown in different types of soil. So would all of that be termed, is there consensus on calling that a varietal? Anything that's from clone only? And then seed varietals would always just be called a cultivar? Is there a consensus on the terminology here? I might have missed something.
Okay, yes, okay, it's working. There are botanical conventions that you can look to help answer those questions. And so cannabis is a really interesting plant because we'll probably have some plants that are clone only. It's gonna be blue bottle, right? Not to pick, it's only blue bottle if it's this cut, it's this genetic. And blue bottle can look different when it's grown on my farm as to oppose when it's grown on Todd's farm. That's perfectly acceptable. That happens a lot in medicinal plants, where you have varietals that produce different chemistries in different areas. So that's very normal in the medicinal plant world. And when you then look for, okay, now we're gonna go in a broader definition and move into seeds, it's really about how you define your cultivar. It has to be genetically consistent, yet you do not need to submit genetics for a patent, for a seed patent. You need to, they're generally to have field trials, and you grow it out and you define what are the parameters of this type. So really good examples in flowers is if you have a certain kind of daisy and it's really short, it has a certain kind of stem patterning, but it doesn't matter if the flowers are blue or red, right? But if I say the flowers have to be red, then the flowers have to be red for that cultivar, right? So it's how you define those seeds and that they're consistent to that definition. So, welcome to plants. They're not straightforward.
Okay, two questions. Okay, first question, is genetic sequencing going to be an element of this study? I didn't hear anybody talk about that. Is it like an inevitable part of the study?
The community will decide which plants are sequenced, and the point of the sequencing as it is laid out in the project is to look at diversity. And in particular, that genetic sequencing, the look into the diversity is to really look, how are we stewarding these plants in an agricultural system, California, where we want to maintain diversity. And if you look inside the licensed diversity and you look in non-licensed operators, I think most of us in this room know from our experience with those data, there's a lot more diversity outside the system. And so how do we then rewrite or inform policy to take care of those members of the community that are stewarding that diversity such that we can maintain this valuable resource? And part of that is letting people grow their plants.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that.
And I just want to say all of the genetic sequence data will be made public. If there's no holding any of this data, anything that is sequenced will be published. It's a publicly funded project. All of this data will go out there for everybody. And only plants that are decided through the community process to be sequenced will be sequenced.
That's awesome. I think it was really nice to see that you guys foreshadow this having policy recommendations involved. So awesome. The other question I was going to ask is about nomenclature, which I'm really glad that's also part of it. It seems like you guys have I love the focuses for this research project. Terms like chemovar, are there any considerations of adopting unique nomenclature just for cannabis, like those kind of terms?
Thank you, Daniel. I think that's a fantastic question, and I think we have a lot of resources within the medicinal plant community to lean on. Chamomile is a really good example. So we have different grades of chamomile. So you only have a pharmacopoeial grade chamomile if it has azulene in it. There are only certain areas in the world where if you grow the exact same genetic of chamomile, that you'll actually produce that molecule, right? And so I think that there's ways that we can understand this within a framework that's not outside of like botanical normal, where we can address the fact that you have things that are either closely related to one another that have different chemistries. I think of this, I'm a dog person, sorry, and it's easier for my brain, even though I'm a botanist, to see it this way. Like there's lots of shepherds, but there's a German shepherd, there's the Austrian shepherd. You know, there's different flavors of the same group. And I think it's really just having open discussions and really thoughtful discussions about these plants, and that's intertwined with history and place and, you know, where you're growing it, and those nuances should be captured. And that is actually one of the beautiful things about an herbarium, because it is very low tech. You can attach all of that information that you're so concerned about to those plant vouchers, and you can understand how that diversity changes in a landscape or with close relatives. And you can layer this on for not very, it's not expensive to press plants. And then you have this resource that you can go back to later to ask questions that become apparent 10 years down the road. You didn't even think to ask when you were making them, but now you have those resources to be able to dive into, to then answer those questions or prove your point or whatever, you know, whatever it is.
All right, I'm gonna just chime in real quick and say we thank Daniel. You snuck that one in. Good job, bro. But those were great questions, by the way. But we're gonna stick to one question per person, please, to make sure that as many people as possible get to ask a question. Thank you.
Hi, so now it's gonna be 2 questions. I'm seeing your timing's really good. I was at the UN Drug Policy Convention, and they started working on piracy. So the world is gonna, nation states are gonna work over the next 3 years to figure out how native species will be able to get compensated. Reparations is probably not gonna be able to work, but moving forward. But my question is, cannabis is really complicated with all the different genetics, but also how it's grown, indoors, outdoors. Is it grown with chemical nutrients? Is it grown in no-till living soil? How are you gonna also factor that in? Because it's, you know, the same cultivar on the same property could be produce really different results depending on how it's grown. Thank you.
And I think the answer to that is decades of research. So we're really trying to start where we're at, and all of all of those avenues of research are exceptionally important, but in order to get there, we have to start with what is this thing? Are we even talking about the same thing when we're putting it in a different environment? So we got to start there. And it's this community that knows those plants well enough to be able to do that work. So more funding, more grant funding, more businesses doing it, more academic institutions doing it, but those are much longer lead questions that need this fundamental work to happen first before you can get there.
Hi, thanks. Click on the mic. Click the mic. It's green. Okay, thank you so much for doing all this. The plant nerd and seed major in me is just enthralled with all this. But then the person who does politics and has been sucked into political warfare for the last 10 years really is viewing it through that lens. And first, let me commend you for, I think this is the first bit of state funding that has gone to anything that acknowledges that there's anything of worth outside the license system. So thank you for that. Small joke, the number of unlicensed people is increasing every day. And so even if you were privileged and industrious enough to make this system that doesn't politically pencil out work, you might be on the majority of our side pretty soon. And really the question built into this is that once we are going to demonstrate that there's so much value in the legacy and the history and all the things these grant dollars are supposed to go to preserve are largely outside the license system, and they're outside the license system because the license system doesn't work. And can we get this as a leverage point to, kind of 10 years later, start readdressing these type of things? And so that's the political, kind of poke in the whole thing. So thank you for everything.
Thanks for the question. It's a critical question. Absolutely. I think that, for our organization, really, it's the power of numbers. When we represent 800 members, and those are licensed individuals, but there are tens of thousands of unlicensed experts, stewards of the plant, people that really should be in the system if they choose to be and want to be participating. And so I think there are a lot of barriers in place, and I think that this project is a unique opportunity to really shine a light on the community that has been stewarding this plant for generations, really elevate that number, and really put a human face, right, and story and neighborhood, or neighborhoods as they say, to it. But in the policy realm, looking at the structures that we're operating under right now, right? We're operating really under prohibition framework. Cannabis is not recognized as an agricultural crop. It's not legally acknowledged that way. It's not regulated that way. And that creates really specific and significant barriers. For example, plant varietal protections. We don't have access to that because that is a federal construct. We don't have access to the National Organics Program. We have the OCal equivalent program here in California because of the vision of our policymakers, and that sets up farmers for success in the federal space when we get there. But we are under critical pressure, and so this is an opportunity, I think, as we're conducting the project and doing so with the community in the community and bringing attention and awareness forward. I think that's leverage for the community to advocate now, and I think the outputs of the project can also go towards advocacy and visibility nationally and internationally. So I think there's a lot of levers to pull here.
In conjunction with that, if a fail-safe as a result of the public policy, if we are able to have community-created influence definitions of, the cultivars, these plants, however they're developed, and we can establish an Appalachian-style protection. At the end of the day, the folks who are operating as it has been under prohibition framework for the past decades now have essentially another remedy at law to help protect their IP in the chance that the commercial cannabis cultivators are international folks. And I use this example from at least the urban side, is that if you go outside of California, you go to Atlanta, you go to Florida, everyone claims to have za. Everyone claims to have runts. And you smoke it like this is not runts, this is not za. They claim to have Cali weed. So if we're talking about how California's influenced the culture and influenced folks internationally, and if we're able to have these protections, then folks who have had this IP for decades and that can now claim that right under the law can monetize that individually or as a community to have that benefit moving forward. And if the fail-safe, we know how politics can be at the state legislature, even at the federal level, at least you have that recourse in the judiciary.
Thank you, Khalil. That's great. We're going to let these last three questions get answered, and then we're going to go ahead and call a break for 15 minutes. Sorry, Chad.
Thank you. Thank you. This is really fascinating, and I think this is incredibly valuable to document all these plants and the culture, because it's disappearing really quick. But my question specifically, I just wanted to see if, and I believe, documenting and all the genetics and such, but was curious if it's on the menu at all, just putting all the genetics out in the public domain, and just avoiding the whole IP and ownership and proprietary genetics and such. And if that's even on the menu, and if there's any historical precedence for that in any plant species just being public domain, and how that works to incentivize innovation and such like that, but without ownership and people being excluded and all the dynamics that come with that. So just curious.
With plants, it's always a mixed bag, especially our medicinal plants. Normally when I give this talk, I have this funny picture of a wagon with all the stuff in it that you take when you move, right? It's your furniture, your pictures, your animals, and your plants. And this has been happening for a millennia, right? Go to that Natural History Museum in Stockholm I was at, and you have Viking evidence of cannabis seeds in burial plots, right? We've been moving this stuff around forever. So the idea of ownership is kind of weird. But we also have individuals that have taken plants and have done an immense amount of work to move them from one place to another. And so to not acknowledge that and just say it's free reign for everyone also doesn't feel right. When you look at other agricultural crops, what you generally have is a mix of ownership. You have certain varietals that are absolutely owned in-house by individuals or organizations. And then you have genomic and genetic resources, normally in the form of a seed bank, that is generally speaking run by the USDA. Like if you want to grow mint, you're going to call up the USDA, or apples, I'll do apples because I know where it is. You're going to call up the USDA field station in Geneva, New York. They have 5,000 varieties of apple grown in triplicate, and you can just ask for whatever cutting of whatever apple you want. And then you can breed with it. You can grow it, you can do whatever. And cannabis will be no different. There will be certain genetic resources that are held in a very communal way that you can use as starting material to spawn innovation and make beautiful, amazing plants. And that work will then be yours. And there'll be certain plants that, sorry, like this dude's been growing this in his backyard or the closet or whatever for this many years, and that truly does belong to that human or that individual or organization. And so, again, it's hard to have clear-cut answers with plants and anything, truly.
Hello. First of all, this is so exciting, and just the fact that the Department of Cannabis Control is open to this kind of project and is open to listening to the community through you guys is very exciting. As you discussed, there are so many strains where there are multiple different people trying to claim that they have, shout out to gelato, like I saw a phylogenetic tree where multiple strains of gelato 44 were much more related to other plants than each other. Do you have any ideas? And the exciting thing is that maybe through oral history you can track down who the originator was, but do you have any ideas on what that could look like in terms of, if you have identified where it came from, promoting the actual strain and like being able to name it in a way that makes it clear that this is what you're actually looking for when you expect what you get from this strain?
Anyone else want to take this one? We're going to have arguments. I think that's a huge thing. The other really nice thing about genetics is they're less prone to bullshit. Less being the operative word. And I think the fact that this project is coming out of community and is overlaid with history and, you know, lots of different data points is the critical fundamental aspect of it. There's also this concept that things that have been out in the market for more than a year you can't own. Like that's just the way it works with plants. So if it's been a name on a board in a dispensary, technically, right? This is technical. Who knows if people are actually going to listen to this, but you can't own it. But we also have a history of not owning plants, which is also strange. That there are certain plants that we feel like we have the right to own, and other plants you're like, oh my God, you're going to own echinacea, and everyone goes up in alarm. So I think it's having some sanity around it and realizing that it's kind of like a shepherd. Some of these plants have been, like, I consider like fundamental breeding stock. And so maybe we should dive in there, right? Like these are community questions. Like let's talk about this because it's not simple or straightforward. And understanding how to approach those type of sticky naming situations is really going to get us to a point where we have names and a naming system that makes sense, that adds value, that when I'm in Atlanta or New York and I see a name on a jar, or up and down the California coast, you know, names don't mean anything. We all know that. Like there's multiple genetics groups that have done that. You take names, you do the genetics, they don't match, period. So let's get a handle on that. And it's this community's job to help because you know better than anybody else. So I hope that answers that question.
Hi, so first I want to say that one of the reasons that we were so excited to fund this project at the department is because it is unique, has so much value, but it is a multidisciplinary, multi-institution. It really is a coming together of, multiple academic institutions, multiple organizations, multiple disciplines. It's storytelling, it's law, it's science, it's
just an incredible project, and so thank you for putting it together. My question is really looking to the future. So we talked a little bit about how this is taking a bite of the elephant, that there is so much more work to be done, that there's so much more room for agricultural infrastructure, for research. I'm curious, looking to the future after this project is done, where do you think the next bite at the apple is to start to build that both agricultural institution, infrastructure, and to take the research after this?
I mean, Christina, a lot of this is dependent upon, you know, federal law changing in some way, shape, or form, right? As long as it's just the Department of Cannabis Control in the state of California that's actually considering this research important, and it's siloed from CDFA, for example, also being able to like essentially launder licensed cannabis money to actually be able to do this kind of research, we're going to be limited. And so that's, you know, I think that we're going to be, we have a lot to do before we hit the limit of what we can do. And some of this is a little bit of a waiting game in terms of what Schedule 3 might open up, for example, for universities to do research that touches the plant. We remain in this situation where we need this, you know, this is a great starting point because we actually really need the community's involvement. Like, institutions actually can't take the lead on this. They're forbidden to, right? So there's political work to be done. And I'm going to throw the next comment over to Genine.
Thanks, Dominic. We're in the business of making change, right? This is what our organization is about, advocating for change. And so the reason, one of the many reasons that we chose to pursue community-based participatory research is to develop a model that we can, as quickly and as aggressively as possible, provide and offer to other community-based organizations so that this work can propagate as quickly and as fast as possible. Because while we are facing an extinction event of the legacy cannabis culture in California, I think about Colombia, I think about Morocco, I think about Afghanistan. There are cultures that have thousands of years of history that are facing a tsunami of global commercialization right now. And so these tools, this study, and trying to create a model that is designed to empower and work with legally marginalized communities is absolutely critical to really addressing the need and the opportunity that's out there. And so that's a really critical part of this project for our organization and community.
If I could just actually,
Should be.
It is. All right, if I could just follow that up, because Eleanor, who again is our scientist for the team, right, everything, right, like, you know, I want to, like, a lot of the examples that we talk about are, like, we compare it to agriculture, right? But I think we really also need to take a moment to realize how that came about. So agriculture in the United States has been supported by the federal government and the state of California for over a century in research. The farmers themselves didn't really do that research. It was state and federal money creating land grant colleges like UC Berkeley, right? That was the main focus, was to harness that type of research. And that's how they built the system in collaboration with the farmers, right? So, I mean, just to add on to what was already been said, I mean, I think really the answer to your question is really more research and more research and more research. I mean, that's really, you know, and more support of that type of research. That's the only way cannabis will ever, I think, reach a level of being into that kind of agricultural framework. Because, I mean, again, I mean, think about it, like, it's a century behind where California agribusiness is, right? And like, there's no place on earth like California when it comes to agriculture. None. I mean, I spent 2 decades studying that, right? There's not even close. And cannabis is actually a part of that. And so the more research we do, particularly after this project, that's what's going to allow us to actually reach that next level for this crop and for the communities that cultivate it.
Thank you. It's really refreshing to hear this conversation being held by a group of professionals such as yourself, and Eleanor and Genine are familiar with me. My name is Dr. Natasha Khalil. Dominic, you interviewed me. And my doctorate is in traditional Eastern medicine, and as we know, cannabis was first mentioned in the Chinese Materia Medica over 2,000 years ago. And the Chinese were remarkable in that they were able to document their history. And now we're watching the rapid colonization of cannabis worldwide. And so my concern as a traditional plant person is how much, and I'm so glad you mentioned what you mentioned, Genine, is how much of the conversation and the origins of where a lot of these cultivars come from, which is Africa, Middle East, and Asia, how much of that story will be included, because I don't want to discredit the work of individuals for the last 50 years, but we're talking about the work of communities for thousands of years that have brought it to here. And that also dovetails into my other question that it relates to equity, because currently the people who dominate the conversation have the resources and the land accessibility, and those who don't have that access are being left out of the conversation. And doesn't mean that they weren't equal or even more greater players on the board. It's just land accessibility is such a huge piece, especially in California. And we're confusing legacy with equity. But as we know, and Dominic, your work illustrates this, equity specifically are folks that come from DIA areas, disproportionately impacted areas. And so those folks, because of their lack of equity, are unable to claim second generation cultivators, but they come from regions, their ancestors come from regions. So how much of a commitment are you guys willing to take to preserve the voices before the most recent ones and the loudest ones?
Thank you, Natasha. It's so nice to see you in person. One of the two articles really is the global context, and I think it's important in that context to start with, we're also giving back to the world in our particular privileged moment as like the first place in the world really where we're being financially supported to ask these kinds of questions, and we owe it to the rest of the world to acknowledge that actually like cannabis is older than California, and to situate that story in one of, you know, the rise of interdependency around the world, to situate it in post-colonial processes, and to talk about how the, you know, expansion of empire and the diaspora of displaced people like moved those genetics, and how actually critical that was. So I think, you know, for me actually it's what I want to kind of really keep doing and developing past this is that global agenda. But I want to start with being, you know, extremely well informed and situating our project as one that's about acknowledging the, you know, the global equity story, right? And, you know, the role of the U.S. in, you know, funding cannabis eradication around the world against marginalized people, not just in California, but around the world, right? And so, for me, it's a first chapter, I think, of what I consider to be maybe my long-term research interest. And it's informed by having conversations with people around the world who are asking these questions too. And so we want to make sure we're addressing the scope of the deliverables we need to do for this grant, but that is situating this in a story of, you know, of a global history of cannabis moving with displaced people around the world, and how the structural ways in which like displacement has happened have political centers, right? And how prohibition kind of joined that process, which is thousands of years old, right? And so, I'm excited to hear your question, and I really, definitely, it's really important to me. And I believe it's important to the rest of the team as well. It is my particular responsibility to take that on, and I certainly hope to be in conversation with you in particular going forward as someone to talk to about that. Thank you, Natasha.
Hi, everyone. All right, we're going to take a 15-minute break. And then I would like to remind everyone that we have these breakout discussions happening at the designated tables. I'll try to make sure the signs are standing and maybe the wind has calmed down enough to stay there. They were dancing around the tables earlier, just partying on their own. So there's the slide about the breakout tables. All right, y'all. Break.